The frozen river cracked beneath Zelda Norton's boots like a warning she should have heeded 3 steps earlier. But by the time the sound registered in her mind, the ice had already given way, and she was plunging into water so cold it felt like 1,000 knives stabbing every inch of her skin at once. It was January 1885, and Carlin, Nevada had been gripped by an unusual cold snap that had frozen the Humboldt River solid, or so everyone had believed. Zelda had been taking the shortcut across the river to reach the mercantile on the other side, her arms full of fabric samples she needed to deliver before nightfall. Her seamstress business depended on meeting deadlines, and she had not wanted to take the long way around through town. Now, as the frigid water swallowed her whole, and the current immediately began dragging her downstream beneath the ice shelf, she realized her impatience might cost her everything. The shock of the cold water seized her lungs, and she barely managed to keep from gasping and inhaling water. Her heavy wool coat and long skirts became waterlogged instantly, dragging her down like anchors. She kicked frantically, trying to swim upward, but the current was stronger than she had anticipated. Her hands hit solid ice above her head. Panic flooded through her veins, hotter than the water was cold. She was trapped. The hole she had fallen through was already behind her, carried away by the swift current that pulled her along beneath the frozen surface. Her hands scraped against the underside of the ice, searching desperately for another opening, another crack, anything. Her lungs began to burn. The world above the ice was a blur of white and gray, distorted by the water and the thickness of the frozen barrier between her and life. She pounded against the ice with her fists, but it was thick and solid here, refusing to break. The edges of her vision began to darken. This was how she would die, she thought with strange clarity. 22 years old, drowned beneath the ice of a river in a harsh Nevada winter, her body not to be found until spring thaw. Then something dark moved above the ice, a shadow, large and fast. Zelda's consciousness was slipping away, but some primal part of her brain registered that someone was up there. She raised one hand and pressed it flat against the ice, a final plea for help. She did not have the breath to scream. Owen Vance had been riding along the riverbank when he saw the woman fall through. He had been on his way back to his small ranch outside Carlin after picking up supplies, his pack horse trailing behind his gray gelding. The crack of the ice breaking had carried across the winter air like a gunshot, and he had turned his head just in time to see her disappear into the dark water. Without thinking, he spurred his horse forward, his eyes tracking the current, calculating where she would be swept. He leaped from his saddle while his horse was still moving, his boots hitting the frozen riverbank hard. He could see her beneath the ice, a dark shape being carried downstream by the current. Her pale hand pressed against the underside of the ice, and that image would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ran alongside the river, staying parallel to her, his eyes searching for a weak spot in the ice. There, ahead, where a large boulder jutted up from the riverbed, the ice looked thinner, stressed by the obstacle in the current. Owen did not slow down. He raised his boot and brought it down hard on the ice near the boulder. The surface cracked but did not break. He stomped again, then again, feeling the ice begin to give. He dropped to his knees and used the butt of his rifle to smash at the weakened spot. Finally, blessedly, the ice shattered, and he plunged his arms into the water just as Zelda's body came sweeping past beneath. His hands closed around wet fabric, and he hauled upward with all his strength. Her head broke the surface, her lips blue, her eyes closed. She was not breathing. Owen dragged her up onto the ice, praying it would hold both their weights, and then pulled her toward the shore. The ice groaned beneath them, but held. He got her onto the snowy riverbank and immediately turned her on her side, pounding on her back. "Come on," he said through gritted teeth. "Come on, breathe." Water poured from her mouth, and then she gasped, a horrible choking sound, and began to cough violently. Relief flooded through Owen so powerfully his hands shook, but relief was a luxury they could not afford yet. She was soaking wet in below freezing temperatures, and the nearest shelter was his ranch, still a 20-minute ride away. If he did not get her warm soon, she would die anyway. He stripped off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She was still coughing, barely conscious, shaking so hard her teeth chattered audibly. He carried her to his horse, which had stopped a few yards away, and stood waiting, trained to ground tie. Getting into the saddle while holding her was awkward, but Owen managed, settling her across his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against his chest, and urged his horse into a gallop. The ride to his ranch was the longest 20 minutes of Owen's life. The woman in his arms drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherent words. He kept talking to her, nonsense mostly, just trying to keep her aware and fighting. His pack horse had followed them, trailing behind faithfully. The cold bit through Owen's shirt and vest without his coat, but he barely felt it. All his focus was on the woman and on getting her to warmth. His ranch was small, just a cabin, a barn, and a few outbuildings on a modest piece of land where he raised horses. He rode right up to the cabin door, dismounted with her still in his arms, and kicked the door open. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, but embers were enough. He laid her on the rug in front of the fireplace and quickly built up the fire, adding logs until flames leaped high. Then came the difficult part. Her wet clothes had to come off, or she would never get warm. Owen turned his back to give her what privacy he could in this situation and spoke clearly. "Madam, I need to get these wet clothes off you. I am going to be a gentleman about this, but you will die if you stay in them." She did not respond. She might not have even heard him. Owen grabbed a thick wool blanket from his bed and returned to her. He worked quickly and efficiently, unlacing her boots, peeling off her wet stockings, unbuttoning her coat and dress. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, focusing on the practical necessity of the task. When he had her down to her undergarments, he wrapped her tightly in the blanket and moved her closer to the fire. Then he stripped off his own wet shirt and hung their clothes near the fire to dry. He heated water and made strong coffee, then tried to get her to drink some. She swallowed a little, coughed, and her eyes fluttered open. They were brown, he noticed, a deep brown like rich earth. She looked at him with confusion and fear. "You are safe," Owen said quietly. "You fell through the ice on the river. I pulled you out. You are at my ranch and you are safe." Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She tried again. "Cold," she whispered. "I know, the fire will warm you. Just rest." She closed her eyes again, and Owen spent the next hour tending to her, making sure she stayed warm, getting small sips of warm liquid into her. Slowly, gradually, color began to return to her face. Her shaking lessened. She drifted into what seemed like actual sleep rather than unconsciousness, and Owen finally allowed himself to sit back and take a breath. Only then did the reality of what had just happened sink in. He had almost watched someone die. If he had been a minute later, if the ice had been thicker, if the current had been faster, she would be dead. His hands began to shake with delayed reaction, and he clenched them into fists. He looked at the woman sleeping by his fire, wrapped in his blanket, her long dark hair drying in waves around her face. He did not know her name or anything about her, but he knew he would never forget the sight of her hand pressed against that ice, or the weight of her lifeless body in his arms as he dragged her from the water. Owen stood and went to tend his horses, giving himself something practical to do. He unsaddled them, rubbed them down, gave them feed and water. By the time he returned to the cabin, dusk was falling and the woman was stirring again. She pushed herself up on one elbow, clutching the blanket around herself, and looked around the cabin with more awareness. When her eyes landed on Owen, she tensed. "Easy," he said, holding up his hands. "I am not going to hurt you. My name is Owen Vance. This is my ranch. You fell through the ice and I pulled you out and brought you here to get you warm." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her taking in the situation. The cabin, his clothes hanging by the fire next to hers, the blanket wrapped around her. A flush crept up her cheeks. A thank you, she said, her voice hoarse. You saved my life. Could not very well let you drown, Owen said. What is your name? Zelda Norton. I live in Carlin. I have a seamstress shop there. She looked down at herself, then back at him. Did you? I had to get your wet clothes off, Owen said bluntly. You would have died otherwise. I was as respectful as I could be under the circumstances. She nodded slowly, the flush deepening, but she met his eyes. Thank you. For that too. For being respectful. An awkward silence fell between them. Owen cleared his throat. Are you hungry? I was about to make some supper. I am, she admitted. But I should get back to town. People will be worried. It is nearly dark, and you are in no condition to travel, Owen said. You nearly died today. You need rest. I will take you back to town in the morning. Zelda looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was written in every line of her body. I do not want to impose. You are not imposing. I have a bed. You will take it. I will sleep out here by the fire. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will, Owen said, his tone brooking no argument. Now do you want beans and bacon or beans and bacon? Despite everything, a small smile tugged at her lips. I suppose I will have the beans and bacon. Owen cooked a simple meal, and they ate in companionable silence. Zelda was clearly still exhausted, her movements slow, her eyes heavy. When they finished eating, Owen showed her to his small bedroom. Your clothes should be dry by morning, he said. There is a chamber pot under the bed if you need it. Call out if you need anything else. Thank you, Owen, she said softly. Truly, I owe you my life. No debt, Owen said. Just glad I was there. He closed the door and returned to the main room, making up a pallet by the fire. He lay down, but sleep was a long time coming. His mind kept replaying the events of the day, kept seeing her sinking beneath the ice. He had been a cowboy for most of his life, had worked ranches all over Nevada and California, had saved animals from rivers and ravines and all manner of danger, but he had never pulled a person from death before. It felt different. It meant something different. In the bedroom, Zelda lay in Owen's bed, staring at the dark ceiling. She could still feel the cold water closing over her head, still feel the panic of being trapped beneath the ice. And then she remembered the shadow above her, the ice breaking, strong hands pulling her up. She remembered very little of the ride to the ranch, but she remembered the steady thud of his heartbeat beneath her ear, remembered his voice, deep and rough, telling her to hold on. She knew Owen Vance by reputation. Everyone in Carlin knew the horse rancher who kept to himself, who was honest in his dealings and quiet in his ways. She had never spoken to him before today, had only seen him from a distance a handful of times. He was probably around 30, she guessed, with dark hair, gray eyes, and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Not a handsome man in the conventional sense, but there was something solid and trustworthy about him. He had saved her life. More than that, he had done it without expecting anything in return, had been respectful when he easily could have taken advantage, had given up his bed and offered his protection without a second thought. In her experience, such men were rare. Sleep finally claimed her, and she slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in days. Morning came cold and clear. Owen was up before dawn, as was his habit, and had coffee brewing and breakfast cooking by the time Zelda emerged from the bedroom. She had dressed in her clothes, which were dry but wrinkled, and had done her best to tame her hair. Morning, Owen said. How are you feeling? Sore, she admitted. But better. Much better. That is good. Breakfast is almost ready. They ate eggs and biscuits, and then Owen hitched up his wagon. He helped Zelda up onto the seat, and they set off for Carlin. The town was about 5 miles from his ranch, and the road was rutted and frozen. They rode in silence for a while, the morning sun glinting off the snow-covered landscape. What were you doing on the river? Owen finally asked. Taking a shortcut, Zelda said ruefully. I had fabric samples to deliver, and I was running late. Everyone said the river was frozen solid. I guess they were wrong. The Humboldt is tricky, Owen said. The current is stronger than it looks, even under ice. Makes weak spots. I will remember that in the future, Zelda said dryly. Another silence fell. Owen seemed comfortable with silence, but Zelda found herself wanting to fill it, wanting to know more about this man who had saved her. Have you lived in Carlin long? She asked. About 5 years, Owen said. Bought the ranch after working as a cowboy for most of my 20s. Wanted a place of my own, a chance to raise horses instead of cattle. Do you like it? The horse business? I do. It is honest work. The animals are easier to deal with than most people. Zelda laughed. I cannot argue with that. What about you? How long have you been a seamstress? 3 years. I learned from my mother. She was a seamstress back in St. Louis, where I am from. When she died, I decided I needed a fresh start. I came west and ended up in Carlin. You came alone? Yes. I have no other family. It was just me and my mother, and when she passed, there was nothing keeping me there. Owen glanced at her, and she saw something like respect in his eyes. That took courage. Or foolishness, Zelda said. Sometimes I am not sure which. Courage, Owen said firmly. Definitely courage. They arrived in Carlin to find the town in a state of concern. Zelda's absence had been noted, and people had been searching for her. When the wagon rolled down Main Street with Zelda sitting beside Owen Vance, heads turned and whispers started. Owen pulled the wagon up in front of the building where Zelda rented her shop and living quarters on the second floor. He helped her down, and immediately several townspeople rushed over. Zelda, where have you been? We were so worried. What happened? Are you all right? Zelda held up her hands. I am fine. I fell through the ice on the river yesterday. Mr. Vance here pulled me out and took me to his ranch to recover. He saved my life. The crowd turned to look at Owen, who had climbed down from the wagon and was standing awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. The town doctor, an older man named Samuel Hart, pushed through the crowd. Let me look at you, Zelda, he said. You could have injuries. I am fine, truly, Zelda protested, but Doctor Hart was already ushering her toward his office down the street. Come on, let an old man do his job. And you, Mr. Vance, you did a fine thing. This town owes you a debt. Owen shook his head. No debt, just doing what anyone would do. But as he looked around at the gathered crowd, he was not so sure that was true. Some of them, maybe, but not all. He tipped his hat and turned back to his wagon, intending to head home, but Zelda's voice stopped him. Owen. He turned. She had paused at the doctor's door, looking back at him. Thank you, she said. For everything. He nodded. Take care of yourself, Zelda. Then he climbed onto his wagon and drove away, leaving the townspeople to buzz with speculation and questions. Zelda watched him go, feeling an odd pang in her chest, almost like loss, which made no sense at all. Doctor Hart examined her thoroughly and pronounced her remarkably unscathed, given what she had been through. You were very lucky, he said. Another minute under that ice and you would not be here. Owen Vance did a brave thing. I know, Zelda said softly. Over the next few days, the story of her rescue spread through Carlin and the surrounding area. Everywhere Zelda went, people wanted to hear about it, wanted to know the details. She told the story over and over, always emphasizing how brave and quick thinking Owen had been, how respectful, how kind. But as the days passed, she found herself thinking about him for reasons that had nothing to do with gratitude. She remembered the steadiness of his voice, the gentleness of his hands, despite their obvious strength, the way he had asked for nothing in return. She found herself wondering what he was doing, how he was, whether he ever thought about that day. A week after the incident, Zelda made a decision. She spent an entire day baking, making her best bread, cookies, and a pie. She packaged everything carefully, borrowed a horse and small cart from the livery, and set out for Owen's ranch. The ride took about an hour, and she found the place easily enough. It was modest but well kept, the fences in good repair, the barn tidy. She could see horses in a corral, beautiful animals with sleek coats. As she drove up, Owen emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw her, surprise clear on his face. "Zelda," he said as she pulled the cart to a stop. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she said, climbing down. "I just wanted to thank you properly. I brought you some things." She indicated the packages in the cart. Owen came closer, looking bemused. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to. You saved my life, Owen. That is not something I take lightly." He helped her carry the packages into the cabin, and she could see his eyes widen when he saw how much she had brought. "This is too much," he said. "It is not nearly enough," Zelda countered. "But it is a start." She looked around the cabin, seeing it properly for the first time. It was small and Spartan, clearly the home of a bachelor, but it was clean and organized. The furniture was simple but well made. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace. She had not expected the books. Owen saw her looking. "I like to read," he said almost defensively. "Taught myself when I was young." "I like to read too," Zelda said. "What do you read?" "Anything I can get my hands on. History, mostly. Some novels." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and then Zelda made another decision, one that surprised her even as she made it. "Would you like to have supper with me?" she asked. "Tomorrow night? At my place, I mean, as a thank you." Owen looked startled. "You do not need to thank me again." "I know I do not need to. I want to. Please, let me do this." He studied her for a long moment, and she found herself holding her breath, waiting for his answer. Finally, he nodded. "All right. What time?" 7 o'clock? "I will be there." Zelda smiled, feeling absurdly pleased. They talked for a few more minutes, and then she left, driving the borrowed cart back to town with a lightness in her heart that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the possibility of something more. Owen watched her go, wondering what he was getting himself into. He had lived alone for so long, had gotten used to his solitary life. But there was something about Zelda Norton that drew him, something beyond her pretty face and brave spirit. She made him want to take a risk, to open himself up to possibility. The next evening, Owen dressed in his best clothes, which were not saying much, but they were clean and pressed. He rode into Carlin just before 7 and found Zelda's shop easily. He climbed the stairs to her second-floor living quarters and knocked. When she opened the door, his breath caught. She was wearing a simple blue dress, and she had done something with her hair that made it shine. She smiled at him, and he felt something shift in his chest. "Come in," she said. "I hope you are hungry." The meal she had prepared was delicious, far better than anything Owen could make for himself. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing more easily than he had expected. She asked about his horses, and he found himself telling her about his plans to breed quality stock, about his hopes for the ranch. She told him about her business, about the challenges of being a single woman running her own shop, about the satisfaction she found in creating beautiful things. After dinner, they sat by her small fire, drinking coffee, and the conversation turned more personal. "Can I ask you something?" Zelda said. "Sure. Why did you come west? What were you running from?" Owen was quiet for a moment. "What makes you think I was running from something?" "Most people who come west are running from something, or looking for something. Sometimes both." He considered that. "I suppose you are right. I was not running exactly. More like looking. I grew up in a small town in Missouri. My father was a farmer, and he expected me to take over the farm. But I wanted more. I wanted to see things, to have adventures. So when I was 18, I left, worked as a cowboy, saw a lot of the West. But eventually I realized adventures are not enough. You need roots too. So I found a place to put down those roots. Do you ever regret it? Leaving your family? Sometimes. My father never forgave me for leaving. We have not spoken in years, but I cannot regret living my own life, making my own choices. Zelda nodded, understanding in her eyes. I know what that is like. My mother wanted me to marry a man back in St. Louis, a merchant's son. He was respectable and well off, but I did not love him. She could not understand why that mattered. We argued about it right up until she got sick. I have always wondered if the stress of our arguing made her illness worse. You cannot think like that, Owen said gently. People get sick. It is not your fault. Logically, I know that, but guilt is not always logical. They sat in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who understand each other's pain. When Owen finally left, late into the evening, he found himself reluctant to go. And judging by the way Zelda lingered at the door, he thought she might feel the same. Over the following weeks, Owen found himself making more trips into Carlin than strictly necessary. He would stop by Zelda's shop, ostensibly to pick up sewing work on his shirts or to deliver vegetables from his winter stores, but really just to see her, to talk to her. She would come out to his ranch, bringing food or books to lend him, staying for supper, staying longer each time. The town noticed, of course. Carlin was small, and gossip was a primary form of entertainment. People talked about the seamstress and the horse rancher, speculated about whether a courtship was developing. Zelda's friends teased her gently, and she found herself blushing and denying it, even as she knew it was true. Because she was falling in love with Owen Vance. She had not meant to, had not planned it, but it was happening anyway. She loved his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he listened when she talked. She loved watching him work with his horses, the patience and skill he showed. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and rare. Owen was falling too, though he was less willing to admit it, even to himself. He had not thought much about marriage or family in his 31 years. He had been too focused on building his life, on establishing his ranch. But now, with Zelda in his world, he found himself imagining a future that included her. He imagined her living in his cabin, imagined expanding it to make room for a family. Imagined children running in the yard and horses in the corral and Zelda smiling at him across the breakfast table. It terrified him as much as it exhilarated him. One evening in late February, Owen came to Zelda's rooms for supper, as had become their habit. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, an awareness between them that had been building for weeks. After they ate, they sat by the fire as usual, but instead of the comfortable distance they usually maintained, they sat close together on the small sofa. Owen could smell the lavender soap she used, could feel the warmth of her body next to his. "Zelda," he said, his voice rough, "I need to say something." She turned to look at him, her brown eyes wide. "What is it?" "I have been thinking a lot lately, about you, about us, about what I want." "And what do you want?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want you," Owen said simply. "I want to court you properly. I want to see where this goes between us. But I need to know if you want the same thing." Zelda's breath caught. For a moment she did not speak, and Owen felt his heart begin to sink. Then she reached out and took his hand. "I want the same thing," she said. "I have wanted it for weeks now. I was just waiting for you to say something." The relief that flooded through Owen was so powerful it made him dizzy. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am not a rich man," he said. "I cannot offer you a fancy life, but I can offer you honesty and loyalty and everything I have. That is all I want," Zelda said. "That and you." Owen cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion. She melted into him, her arms going around his neck, and for a long moment nothing existed but the two of them and the fire crackling in the hearth and the feeling of coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I am going to marry you, Zelda Norton, he said. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but I am going to marry you. I am going to hold you to that, Owen Vance, she replied, smiling. From that night on, they were officially courting, and the whole town knew it. Owen came into Carlin every Sunday to escort Zelda to church, and they sat together in the pews, their shoulders touching. They attended town socials together, danced together at the spring barn dance, went on picnics when the weather warmed. Zelda learned more about Owen as the months passed. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he was generous to a fault, helping neighbors with their work without being asked. She learned that he had a temper, though he controlled it carefully, and that he could not stand injustice or cruelty. Owen learned that Zelda was smarter than most people gave her credit for, that she had a head for business and numbers. He learned that she loved beautiful things, but was practical above all else. He learned that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide, and that when she set her mind to something, there was no changing it. They learned each other's flaws too. Owen could be too quiet, too closed off, reluctant to share his feelings. Zelda could be too independent, too quick to assume she had to handle everything herself. But they learned to navigate these differences, to communicate, to compromise. In May, Owen asked Zelda to marry him properly. He took her out to his ranch on a beautiful spring day when the wildflowers were blooming across the Nevada hills. He had prepared a picnic, and they ate by the creek that ran through his property. Afterward, he got down on one knee and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said. "It is the only thing of value I own that was passed down to me. I want you to have it. I want you to be my wife, Zelda. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Zelda's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, and the world felt full of possibility and promise. They were married in June in a simple ceremony at the Carlin church. The whole town turned out to celebrate. Dr. Hart gave Zelda away, standing in for the father she had lost years ago. Owen's face when he saw her walking down the aisle in the white dress she had sewn herself was something Zelda would treasure forever. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The reception was held at the town hall, with music and dancing, and food contributed by half the town. People came up to them all night, wishing them well, telling them they made a fine couple. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, hugged Zelda tightly and whispered, "I knew from the moment he pulled you from that river that this was meant to be. Sometimes near tragedy leads to the greatest blessings." As the evening wound down, Owen and Zelda climbed into his wagon, now decorated with ribbons and tin cans, and headed for the ranch that would now be their home together. Zelda had already moved most of her belongings out there over the past week, and Owen had spent the last month expanding the cabin, adding a larger bedroom and a separate room that could serve as Zelda's sewing room. That night, in the privacy of their home, they consummated their marriage. Owen was gentle and patient, making sure Zelda felt loved and cherished. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. "I love you," Zelda whispered into the darkness. "I loved you from the moment you broke through that ice." "I love you too," Owen replied, "and I will keep breaking through any barriers to keep you safe and happy." Life as a married couple was an adjustment, but a happy one. Zelda kept her seamstress business, but worked from home now, converting the room Owen had built into a proper sewing room. She took commissions from the women in Carlin and the surrounding ranches, building a reputation for quality work. Owen continued breeding horses, and his reputation grew too. People came from as far as California to buy his stock. They worked side by side, building their life together. Owen taught Zelda to ride better, and she began helping him with the horses. Zelda taught Owen some of her favorite recipes, and their suppers became more elaborate. They read together by the fire on winter nights, discussed the books, and the news from back east. They argued sometimes, but they always made up, learning that marriage was about choosing each other over and over again. In the spring of 1886, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction, but he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Zelda said, touching his face. "Our child is lucky to have you." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Zelda had to cut back on some of her work as she grew larger. Owen was attentive and worried, constantly fretting that she was doing too much or not eating enough. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. In December 1886, after a long labor that terrified Owen and left Zelda exhausted, they welcomed their first child into the world, a son. They named him Thomas after Owen's grandfather, with the middle name of James after Zelda's father. Owen held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his weathered face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You did so well, Zelda. You are amazing." "We made him together," Zelda said, tired but happy. "He is ours." Becoming parents changed them in ways both expected and unexpected. Owen discovered a capacity for love he had not known he possessed. He would spend hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny hands and feet, the small features that were a blend of him and Zelda. He became even more protective, even more determined to build a good life and a safe home. Zelda found that motherhood came naturally to her. She loved nursing Thomas, loved the feeling of providing for him, but she also made sure to keep her identity beyond being a mother. She continued her sewing work, though on a smaller scale, and she made Owen promise to support her in maintaining that part of herself. As Thomas grew, the ranch grew too. Owen bought more land, expanded his breeding operation. Zelda's sewing business thrived, and she began training a young woman from Carlin as an apprentice. They were prosperous, not wealthy, but comfortable and secure. In 1889, they had a second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was spirited from the moment she was born. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. Life fell into a rhythm, the years passing in a blur of work and love and family. Thomas grew into a quiet boy much like his father, serious and responsible. Rose was the opposite, full of laughter and mischief, always getting into things she should not. Owen and Zelda navigated parenthood together, learning as they went, making mistakes, but always putting their children first. In 1892, Zelda became pregnant again, and in early 1893, they welcomed a third child, another son they named Daniel. With 3 children, the cabin was bursting at the seams, so Owen spent that summer building an addition, expanding the house into something more substantial. The children loved having more space, and Zelda loved having a larger kitchen. The years rolled on, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas learned to ride and began helping his father with the horses. Rose learned to sew from her mother and showed a real talent for it. Daniel, the baby of the family, was a happy child who loved everyone and everything. Owen and Zelda grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered hardships, the harsh Nevada winters, the occasional drought, illness and injury and worry. But they had weathered it all together, and that made all the difference. One cold January evening in 1895, 10 years after Owen had pulled Zelda from the frozen river, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set over the Nevada hills. The children were inside, Thomas helping Rose with her arithmetic, while Daniel played with wooden horses Owen had carved for him. "Do you remember this day 10 years ago?" Zelda asked, leaning against Owen's shoulder. "I remember every detail," Owen said. "I was riding home from town, and I heard the ice crack. I looked over and saw you fall through. My heart stopped." Mine did too, literally almost, Zelda said with a wry smile. I thought I was going to die under that ice, but then I saw you above, and I knew somehow that you would save me. I almost did not get to you in time. That still gives me nightmares sometimes. But you did get to me in time, and you brought me here, and you took care of me, and you changed my whole life. Owen kissed the top of her head. You changed mine too. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. After you, I was living. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Zelda corrected gently. That is how it works when two people truly love each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Inside, they could hear the children laughing at something, the sound of their family happy and whole. Do you think we have done all right? Owen asked suddenly. With the ranch, the children, our life? I think we have done more than all right, Zelda said. I think we have built something beautiful. Look at what we have, Owen. This land, this home, 3 healthy children who are loved and cared for. We have each other. What more could we possibly need? Nothing, Owen admitted. Not a single thing. As the years continued to pass, Owen and Zelda watched their children grow into capable young adults. Thomas showed a natural talent for horse breeding and took over more and more of the operation, allowing Owen to slow down a bit as he entered his 50s. Rose's sewing skills surpassed even her mother's, and together they expanded the business, taking on more complex commissions and training other young women. Daniel decided he wanted to be a teacher and went away to school for training, eventually returning to Carlin to teach at the newly built schoolhouse. Owen and Zelda became grandparents in 1908 when Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Elko and gave them their first grandchild, a girl named Lucy. Rose married a year later to a merchant from Carlin, and soon there were more grandchildren filling the house with noise and joy. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together on the porch on winter evenings, wrapped in blankets, talking about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, still found comfort in the familiar touch of the person they had chosen so many years ago. In 1920, Owen and Zelda celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, and it seemed like half of Carlin showed up. There was food and music and laughter, and in the middle of it all, Owen took Zelda's hand and led her out to dance, just like they had at their wedding all those years ago. I would do it all over again, Owen whispered in her ear as they swayed together. Every moment, every hardship, every joy, I would choose you again and again. And I would fall through that ice again if I knew it would lead me to you, Zelda replied, tears in her eyes. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Owen Vance. You are my whole world, Zelda Vance. You always have been. They continued to dance, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured for 35 years. And as the sun set on that perfect day, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink, Owen and Zelda looked at each other and knew beyond any doubt that they had lived a life worth living. The ranch thrived under Thomas's management, the business grew under Rose's creative direction, and Daniel's students flourished under his patient teaching. The grandchildren grew, and eventually there were great-grandchildren too, small faces with familiar features, carrying on the legacy that had begun with a frozen river and a desperate rescue. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 71. Zelda held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering words of love and promises to see him again someday. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in northern Nevada, a testament to the man he had been and the life he had lived. Zelda lived for 3 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, sewing for her great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days. She told them about the frozen river, about the cowboy who had saved her, about the love that had grown from tragedy into something beautiful and enduring. She passed away in 1928 at the age of 65, sitting in her chair on the porch she had shared with Owen for so many years. They found her with a peaceful smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in those final moments. Perhaps she had seen Owen, waiting for her, ready to break through one more barrier to bring her safely home. They were buried side by side in the Carlin Cemetery, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their true memorial was not in stone. It was in the ranch that still stood, now run by their grandson. It was in the sewing business that continued to thrive under their great-granddaughter's management. It was in the school where their son had taught for 30 years, inspiring generations of children. It was in the stories told by their descendants, passed down through the years, about the seamstress who fell through the ice, and the cowboy who saved her, and the great love that grew between them. Years later, a great-great-grandchild would write a book about their story, preserving it for future generations. The book would open with the words Owen himself had spoken once, late in his life, when a young grandchild had asked him about the frozen river. I do not know why I was there that day. I do not know why I looked over at the exact right moment or why I was able to reach her in time. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was luck, maybe it was something else entirely. But what I do know is this: saving Zelda from that frozen river was not the end of something. It was the beginning of the best part of my life, the part that mattered, the part that gave everything else meaning. You can survive a lot of things in this life, but without love, without family, without purpose, you are not really living. Zelda gave me all those things. She was my purpose, my love, my everything. And I spent every day of our life together trying to be worthy of the gift I had been given when I pulled her from that water. The family would gather every year on the anniversary of that January day, not to mourn what had almost been lost, but to celebrate what had been found. They would visit the graves, place flowers, and tell the stories again. And they would look at each other, these descendants of Owen and Zelda, and see the legacy of love that had started with one brave act and one frozen river. The ranch still stands today, a historical landmark now, preserved by the family as a reminder of their roots. Visitors come from all over to see it, to hear the story of the seamstress and the cowboy. Young couples visit, hoping some of that enduring love will rub off on them. Historians visit, documenting the details of life in Nevada in the late 1800s. Children visit on school trips, wide-eyed as they hear about the rescue and the romance that followed. But for the family, it is more than just a story or a historical site. It is a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that tragedy can turn into blessing, that one moment of courage can change everything. It is a reminder that the best things in life are not things at all, but people, connections, relationships built on trust and respect and genuine affection. The Humboldt River still flows near Carlin, and every winter it still freezes, though not as solidly as it once did. Sometimes, on cold January days, if you stand on the bank near where Owen pulled Zelda from the water, you can almost feel the presence of their story, the weight of what happened there and what it meant. You can almost see the shadow of a man running along the bank, desperate to save a life. You can almost hear the crack of ice breaking, the splash of water, the gasp of breath as a woman is pulled back from the edge of death. But more than that, if you listen very carefully, you can almost hear laughter, the sound of a couple dancing, the murmur of conversation on a porch at sunset, the cry of a newborn baby, the chatter of children playing. You can hear the sounds of a life well lived, of love given and received, of promises made and kept. That is the real legacy of Owen and Zelda Vance. Not the dramatic rescue, though that was important. Not the ranch or the business or the material things they built, though those mattered too. The real legacy was love. Simple, honest, enduring love. The kind of love that saves you in more ways than one. The kind of love that breaks through barriers. The kind of love that lasts not just a lifetime, but generations. And if you ever doubt that such love exists, that such stories are real, just visit that old ranch outside Carlin, Nevada. Walk through the rooms where they lived and loved and raised their family. Sit on that porch where they spent so many evenings watching the sunset. Stand by the river where it all began, and you will feel it, the truth of it, the reality of it. Love like that is not just a fairy tale, it is real. It happened, and it changed everything. The last living person who actually knew Owen and Zelda passed away in 1982, a granddaughter named Margaret, who had been 12 when Zelda died. Before she passed, she recorded an oral history for the local historical society, and in it, she shared her favorite memory of her grandparents. I remember one Christmas, I must have been 8 or 9 years old. There was a terrible snowstorm, and we were all snowed in at the ranch. Grandpa and Grandma had all of us grandchildren there, and we were getting restless as children do. Grandpa started telling stories about when he was a cowboy, about the adventures he had, but then Grandma said, "Tell them about the river, Owen. Tell them about the day everything changed." And he did. He told us about seeing her fall through, about running alongside the ice, about breaking through and pulling her out. We had all heard the story before, but this time was different. This time, when he got to the part about wrapping her in his coat and riding for home, he looked at Grandma, and she looked at him, and the love that passed between them in that moment was so powerful, so real, that even as a child I felt it. And I understood, maybe for the first time, what love really meant. It meant seeing someone in danger and running toward it instead of away. It meant giving up your coat even when you are cold too. It meant staying up all night making sure someone else is safe. It meant choosing that person over and over every day for the rest of your life. That is what Grandpa and Grandma taught me. That is their legacy. That understanding of love, that definition, was passed down through the family and out into the world through the people whose lives Owen and Zelda touched. Teachers who learned compassion from their example. Business owners who learned integrity from watching them work. Parents who learned patience from seeing how they raised their children. Couples who learned commitment from hearing their story. The frozen river could have been the end. For a few terrifying minutes, it almost was, but instead it became a beginning, the beginning of a story that would outlast both of them, that would inspire and encourage long after they were gone. A story of courage and rescue and love. Owen once said late in his life that he did not consider himself a hero for what he did that day. "I was just a man who saw someone who needed help and did what I could," he said. "Any decent person would have done the same." But Zelda disagreed. She always maintained that what he did was heroic, not because pulling someone from a river was necessarily heroic in itself, but because of everything that came after, because he was gentle when he could have been rough, because he was respectful when he could have taken advantage, because he was kind when kindness was not required, because he opened his heart to the possibility of love when it would have been easier to stay closed off and alone. True heroism is not just the big dramatic rescue, Zelda told her grandchildren. It is all the small choices afterward. The choice to be kind, to be patient, to be loving even when it is hard. Your grandfather was a hero every day of our marriage in all the quiet, unnoticed ways. That is the kind of hero I hope you all aspire to be. And many of them did aspire to it. Many of them did become those quiet, everyday heroes in their own lives and relationships. The legacy continued, spreading out like ripples from a stone dropped in water, touching lives that never knew the original source but felt the impact nonetheless. In the end, that is what makes a life meaningful. Not fame or fortune or grand achievements, though those can be nice. What makes a life meaningful is love. The love you give and the love you receive. The connections you make and the lives you touch. The family you build and the legacy you leave. Owen and Zelda understood that. They lived it every day. And when their time on earth was done, they left behind something far more valuable than land or money or possessions. They left behind a story, a lesson, and a whole lot of love. They left behind the truth that even the coldest, darkest moments can lead to warmth and light if you are brave enough to reach for it. They left behind the knowledge that love is always worth the risk, always worth the effort, always worth choosing. The frozen river tried to take Zelda that winter day in 1885, but Owen Vance broke through the ice and pulled her out, and in doing so, he saved more than her life. He saved her future, their future, the future of everyone who would come after them. He broke through the barrier between death and life, between strangers and soulmates, between what was and what could be turned out to be extraordinary, a love story for the ages, a family that would span generations, a legacy that would endure long after the ranch crumbled and the river changed course and the very town of Carlin itself evolved beyond recognition. Because love, true love, transcends all of that. It lasts, it endures, it breaks through every barrier. Just like Owen breaking through the ice to reach Zelda, their love broke through the barriers of time and mortality to reach across generations, to touch hearts that would not beat for decades or even centuries after they were gone. That is the power of love. That is the legacy of Owen and Zelda Vance. That is what remains when everything else fades away. And so the story ends where it began, with ice and water and a desperate rescue. But it ends with so much more too, with a life well lived, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with love that grew and deepened and never faded, with two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and chose each other every day after that, with a legacy that will outlast them both, teaching future generations what really matters, what is truly worth fighting for, what makes a life meaningful. She was trapped in the frozen river, under ice. The cowboy broke through and dragged her out. And in that moment of rescue, both their lives were saved. Both their futures were secured. And a love story began that would never truly end because the best stories, the truest loves, never really do end. They just transform, becoming part of something larger, something eternal, something that breaks through every barrier to reach the hearts that need it most.